So welcome everybody to the Northamptonshire Virtual Funding Fair 2021, brought to you by the NDFWN, which is the Northamptonshire Development and Funding Advice Workers Network. And we're a partnership of local infrastructure organisations, local authorities with grants, schemes and funders. And so I'm just going to go through with you a few bits of information before we start. If you could add your organisation as well as your name to the screen, that would be lovely, so we can see who you're representing today. And if everybody could remain on mute until we get to the question and answer session, that would be very helpful. And if you could also use the chat facility to say that you've got a question, so that when Gary finishes his session, we don't miss anybody. The recording will be going to the Northamptonshire Council website. It'll be uploaded next week, so you'll be able to listen to this session again if you want to, and to other sessions as well. And there's also going to be a short feedback questionnaire on the website. And if I could ask you please to complete the questionnaire, because it helps us to plan for next year's funding fair. And there is an incentive of a John Lewis voucher to get you motivated to complete the questionnaire. So I'd be very grateful if you could do that. So thank you very much to Gary Baharrell from Lloyds Bank Foundation, who's going to do our presentation and hopefully answer some questions as well. So Gary, if I can hand over to you.
Right, morning everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Can I enter the draw, please, as well?
Yes, if you finish a questionnaire, yes, please do.
Okay then. Morning everyone. Right, okay. I'm going to lay a ground rule down first of all, and it's quite a simple one because I know we are all very, very busy. To start with, all foundations can't be all things to all people, and I know that we can't be all things to all people. We can be quite clear about what we are looking to support. So consequently, there may well be, as I go through the presentation, people will say, actually, no, that means we can't apply. If that's the case, please, if you want to stay, that's fine, but don't feel obliged to. If you feel actually, no, actually, we're not eligible, so therefore, I'm not going to hang around. That's fine. I won't be offended because I know we've all got other things to do. If nothing else, that's to put the kettle on. So here we go. And then, right. Can everyone see that? Somebody just give me a wave or a thumbs up just to check.
Yes, I can see that.
We've got that. Okay. So you all know now who I am. I'm the regional manager for the East Midlands, which basically means as a foundation, we are a national foundation, but we have regional managers like myself in each of the government regions. Ordinarily, I would be doing this in person. I would be visiting you and things like that. But thanks to pandemic, that's not possible. Bit of background about me. I've been in the voluntary sector for over 40 years. Crikey, I used to say 30, now it's 40, where's time going? For over 40 years. Like many of us, I started as a volunteer when I was still a teenager and things like that. So I've got a lot of experience in the background, all sorts of positions and all sorts of work. The last 20 of those years have been in a grant-making capacity with one or two different charitable foundations. So I've got a lot of experience. I know the region quite well. That's why we live in the region. Okay, I'll get straight to the crux of the matter. There's all sorts of things I could tell you about Lloyds Bank Foundation. The main one is actually we are independent of the bank. And we have our own board of trustees. We rely on the bank for our income because that's a proportion of the bank's profits. There is a covenant in place for that, but we are entirely independent. So if you say to me, but we bank with you, thank you very much for banking with us because that helps with the profits, but it makes no difference to any application. Okay, there are three different strands to our work. but I'll not go into the 3 strands because I know the only reason you guys are here is really to look at funding. How can we get our hands on the dosh? That's the important question. Okay. At this moment in time, we have one funding stream only, and that's our main funding stream. It's always been, we've always been quite, just had one funding stream as a rule, unless we've done some initiatives. And that's called the Renew Fund. The Renew Fund is actually now open, so if you want to apply, you can apply now. Quite simply go to the website, fill in your local authority and which priority you're applying under, and we will tell you almost immediately whether you're eligible to carry on or not. The main aim of a lot of that is to make sure that you don't waste time filling in inappropriate applications. If you get an application in before the 25th of June, we will give you a decision before September or during September next year. Anything after that, and we're looking at sort of October, November, December before we can give you a decision. It's quite a simple grant fund in that actually it's £50,000 over 2 years and it's unrestricted. That's it, that's all there is. There's not, we'd like to apply for 10, we'd like to apply for 20. It's £50,000, £25,000 each year, and it's unrestricted. And the reason it's unrestricted is because we're not interested in projects. We're actually interested in your core work. So it being unrestricted means you can spend it on anything you want. If we feel you are a good fit for our priorities, you could even put it in reserves. Not often you hear that from a funder. The key is actually the development partnership and the appetite for development. Our view is we can trust you to get on and deliver the work you deliver and make a difference, but all organisations, especially after the pandemic, need some support for development. And you should be aware of what your weaknesses are, and you should be aware of actually how you're going to progress and become stronger in a challenging few years for the sector as a whole. We have already said that there are 190 charities that we will fund this year. We've already said that there are a range of regional priorities, and I will go into the regional priorities in a little while. We've already committed or decided that we want at least 25% of our funding to go into our racial equity stream. And again, I will go into what that actually means in a little more detail further down the line. So the first question is about eligibility. The first thing is you must have an income of between £25,000 and £1 million. And that income is taken from your last set of accounts. It's not your current budget, it's your last set of published accounts. You should be working with people aged 17 plus, so we are there to support adults, not children's projects. With the exception of 2 of our priorities where we can look at work with younger people, and I'll go in, actually it's 3 of our priorities, and I will go into them in a moment. You should be a registered charity or a CIO. We don't support CICs. The reason being is that registered charities are registered with the Charity Commission. CICs are registered with Companies House, so it's a different legal structure. So that's usually where I get quite a few organisations dropping off. You must have been delivering services for a year or so. And you must have less than 12 months free reserves, and that's unrestricted free cash in your reserves. We don't take into account restricted reserves, and we don't take into account fixed assets such as buildings. You must also have your own bank account. So that's the eligibility. If you can tick all of those, then we can carry on the conversation. The next thing is we are there to support a number of what we call complex social issues. I think it's probably easier just to call them priorities, but these are the areas that we want to work in. And I'll address these one by one. The first one is addiction or dependency on alcohol, and that is specifically addiction around any of those areas, but it's working with the addicts themselves, not necessarily supporting the families of the addicts. So if your core aim is to support people with an addiction, it's eligible. We're also looking at asylum seekers and refugees, and again, if that's core work and that's your main project, we would be happy to look at you. By asylum seekers and refugees, asylum seekers is fairly self-explanatory. Refugees, we would call people that have been granted refugee status for less than 2 years. So we recently had an application, for example, for an organisation that's working with a community that they are refugees, but their refugee status was granted 20 years ago. So we didn't support them. If you are giving immigration advice or anything like that, we would expect OISC registration. We're also looking at supporting work with care leavers, and certainly with the work with care leavers, that's one of the areas of work where we could start the work below the age of 17. You may be working with 15, 16, 17-year-olds, so we can start that younger. Domestic and sexual abuse is fairly self-explanatory. A lot of work around that. We fund a lot of things around hostel provision and outreach services, etc. Homeless and vulnerably housed, again, a lot of work around that. That's fairly self-explanatory. Learning disabled, and again, that is about supporting individuals to move towards independence. Doesn't necessarily mean towards employment, but to learn those skills that create independence. Just to be very clear on this, learning disabled can work with those that are under 17, but learning disabled, we use MENCAP's definition of this, and that means actually what we don't consider is autism. Where autism is the primary issue you're dealing with, that doesn't, strictly speaking, classify as a learning disabled category. Mental health, again, a lot of work around this, a very high demand for this one. We are primarily looking at people that have a diagnosis of mental health and are involved with services of one kind or another. We would not be looking at things like isolation or depression, if that makes sense. Offending prison or community service, particularly, again, it's fairly self-explanatory, but those that have an offending history, coming out of prison, etc. Sexual exploitation is fairly self-explanatory, but we fund a lot of work around rape, sexual abuse, those sort of things around that. Trafficking and modern slavery is a relatively new one. It's basically about supporting charities that are working those that are or bringing in modern slaves and things for a range of things. Young parents is an area that is also one of those areas that will that is specifically we can look at working with under 17s for that one. Racial equity is a new one, and I will go into that into some more detail because that is quite complicated. So those are the priorities we're looking at. If you work in one of those areas, then we could potentially have a conversation. The next thing is about the programme fit. Whilst you may be working in mental health or whatever it is, the work must be in depth. And by that, we mean you must basically create a relationship with individuals. It's not about information giving. It's not about signposting. It's got to be centered around the person. So we would expect things like personal development plan or personal action plans or support plans of one kind or another. All of the work, when we say holistic, people say, you know, well, we can't provide everything. We don't expect you to provide everything, but we do want to see that you've got good networks in place for referrals, etc. In terms of being targeted, it must be targeted, the work you do must be targeted towards one of those areas, and you must be supporting a journey of change. So we'd like to see how you help people to move on. With the exception of some that I'll go into in a little while, we would expect at least 50% of your work, the majority of your work, to be around one of those priorities, not necessarily just a project. Okay. Now, we work to regional priorities, and the regional priorities are based both on need and demand in the area across the region, and they're also based on what our portfolio looks like. So what you can see here are some areas that we are not open to across the county, across Northamptonshire. We're not open to domestic and sexual abuse, we are not open to homelessness, we are not open to mental health, nor are we open to sexual exploitation. So if you are working in one of those, we are not looking for an application from you at this moment in time. Those regional priorities change as demand changes and as our portfolio changes. They're likely to be up for a review probably around midsummer, but towards the end of the year, those priorities may well have changed. So it's always worth having a regular check on the website. There are 3 areas there that have got nice little shiny asterisks against them. And the reason that they have got nice little shiny asterisks against them is that those areas, you may remember I mentioned not so long back about the 50% rule. The majority of your work must be in one of these regional priorities. If it's got an asterisk against it, that rule has been relaxed. So if you are working with care leavers, young parents, or trafficking as a project that you've been doing for a little while, and it might be a quarter of your work, then you can still come to us. The reason being is actually there is not a lot of work seemingly going on in those areas. So that's what's open here. The next one is the racial equity funding. This is a relatively new fund. It was opened in September of last year. But plans for this year is that the racial equity funding must go towards those that have historically experienced marginalisation, racialisation, oppression and prejudice. I think we're all familiar with those terms. We have decided that at least 50% of the board must be from one of those communities in order that actually they understand and reflect the nature of those communities. So it's those communities being led by themselves. And 50% of your work must support those communities as well. What we would also want to see is that at least some of your work, and that the 50% rule has completely been relaxed in all of the CSIs and all of the priorities for this, but there should be at least some of the work that is working in one of those priorities. We're a little bit more relaxed about how we fund and what we fund there, but we are looking to support at least 38 grants across the country in those areas. In terms of the development support and how the whole thing works, I'll go through the application process first before I explain this. The application process is you would fill in the initial website. The initial website would say, yes, you're eligible, or no, you're not. If you are eligible, you then go to the application form. The application form asks some fairly straightforward questions, such as, what are your objects? What do you do? What are your development needs? Some work about finances and things like that. We will then do some desk-based research based at our head office in London. If we think it's got potential, we will then call you. London will call you to talk about your eligibility, i.e., is this something we might want to explore a bit more? That probably takes half an hour to an hour. At that point, a small panel in London will decide whether we want to take it forward. If they do, that then comes down to me, and that's where the bulk of the work begins. I would then organise a conversation with you. That conversation on average is taking about 2 hours at the moment. It's a lengthy conversation, but it talks not necessarily about the grant or the work, a little bit about that, but 90% of that conversation is around things like your vision, your mission, your culture, your development needs, and all those sort of things, with a view that actually when we put the application to the final panel, we know really what is needed. That's where the development support comes in. And the development support is very much, it's about a relationship between us as a foundation and you as a charity. So we will work hard to identify what support you need. And that support can be in a whole range of issues. But basically what it does mean is I will be walking alongside you for the next 2 years, almost as an independent pair of eyes and an independent input sort of thing. So there will be regular catch-up calls. Depending on your needs, that could be, you know, once a month, it could be once every 3 months. It depends on your needs. And over time that's developed, and we will create relationships with our grantees. You will get access to a range of peer forums where we bring charities together to look at common issues, action learning sets, things like that. And last and not least, there is what we call enhanced support for the whole grant. So certainly with, I think it's about 95% of our charities at the moment are receiving support, specialist support from a consultant. And that will be based around what is needed as a result of the conversations we've had. So it could be fundraising support, it could be consultants around opening shops, it could be consultants around your governance. We've got trustee recruitment agencies, we've got databases, we've got all sorts of things. And we will work with you throughout the year to try and identify what those are. We also have a newsletter. You don't have to be a grantee for the newsletter, but if you're interested in the work we're doing, that's all available there. Basically, that's it. It's a fairly shortish presentation, so I'm just here now to answer any questions. And I saw Kate's already. There's my contact details. If anybody wants to ring me or contact me, I'm more than happy to chat things through. I'd rather spend 20 minutes, half an hour on the phone talking through an application and you getting it right, rather than you spending 2 hours filling in the initial application form only for it to be wrong, and then you've wasted 2 hours and I have to deal with it and I've wasted 2 hours. So let's save some time. So I'm more than happy with that. Katie, family support link. I've had this conversation with you a couple of years ago. No, I'm afraid not. The issue is we cannot support families with addicts. It's with the addicts themselves. So that was the only question. There was a lot more questions yesterday. There's far fewer questions today. Any more questions? Stop sharing now. We're down to 1, 2, 3. Fewer people there this time. That's something we sort of expect. Okay. Any other questions? Well, that was remarkable. That either means that nobody's interested, or it means I've done a very good job in explaining everything.
Very comprehensive presentation, Gary. I think that's what that is. So thank you, Gary, very, very much for giving that presentation. I'm sure we've got all the details there so people can come back to you. And that offer of being able to phone and have a chat through something before you actually complete an application, I always find that very, very useful indeed.
Yeah. And feel free to share the slides. I mean, I know the presentation's going on, but feel free to share the slides as well.
Absolutely. So if people would like the slides, I haven't actually got your email addresses myself, but if you send them to me, I will send the slides out to you.
Maybe in terms of racial equity, eligibility really is confined to a number of geographic areas, which I think is the top 75 on the IMD or something like that. I can't remember that. Somebody else deals with that bit. But we would prefer, there does have to be a social issue there. So it does have to be one of the CSIs. So if it is mental health you're working in, you will still get through on that because racial equity is your primary one.
Okay, anybody else got any queries, questions? No? Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. As you know, the session's been recorded and it will be uploaded to the Northamptonshire website so that you can have a listen to it again if you'd like to. And if you could please remember to complete the online questionnaire so that we can plan the funding fair for next year, that would be great. And again, if you would like to be part of the prize draw for a John Lewis voucher, could you make sure you remember to put in your email address on the questionnaire. So thank you again to Gary for your presentation, very helpful, and I hope you all have a very nice return to the next sessions on the funding fair.
And good luck with your fundraising, everyone. It's going to get difficult over the next few years, I think. Thanks now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.